Hello. I apologise because Chris stamped his feet last year and said he had to come to Cardiff from Bristol, and I'm from Bristol, so I put a fly in that particular ointment. In 2016, I said this.
Almost everything that's wrong with the games industry and consumers today can be attributed to a modern obsession with marketing through building communities. In the old days, we used to make stuff and the only engagement we had was people buying the game or not. Around 10, 12 years ago, there became a pervasive marketing-led need to create communities around games, because that's the easiest way to sell them, because marketing is difficult, and marketing people are lazy, and they're riddled with cocaine.
So yeah, that was me. The rest of this talk was a fairly fanciful discussion about whether we were falling into a trap of assuming that all engagement was equally valuable, and whether the wisdom of the crowds was all that wise, or to put it more succinctly, Boaty McBoatface and the false promise of democracy. 6 years, one pandemic, 2 game releases, and a lot less hair later, my opinion had changed on the value of designing games through building a community. So I pitched this talk to the Develop Conference, which was rejected. So I will give it to you now. It was sort of accepted in the sense that I was a backup speaker, which meant that I had to do the work, but I didn't get to deliver the talk, which is a mixed blessing. So if you think that this feels like a much longer talk that was sort of half written because I didn't want to go to too much effort and has then subsequently been compressed into a much smaller amount of time, you would be exactly right. So yeah, this is Face and Time Spaces, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Trust User Feedback. Our game, Face and Time Spaces. For those of you who don't know it, why would you? It was a turn-based tactical deck-building game where you played your cards, kicked various men in the face. It had roguelike elements, it was clearly action movie inspired, it had this striking and gifable visual style. The aim was to create a high-quality game with a small team and push it into that premium indie bracket that is so sought after. And so, for this title, we needed to make use of a community. And the reasons for that were several-fold. It's a small team size. When we made this game, we only had 8 people. It's a very system-driven title, so the mechanics and the systems in it are all very interconnected, but there was a lot of opportunity for synergy and people playing in different play styles and people using the tools that we gave them in different ways. And that made it really hard to test internally. We couldn't predict every single combination of what people were going to do. So we needed a larger pool of people in order to achieve that. And as you saw at the start, I have reservations about that. And I think these were natural things to think. I was worried about quality. I was worried that users would provide the right quality feedback for what we needed to make the game better. I was worried that it might be a distraction, that we might have so much volume of feedback from users we'd stop listening to what we were saying internally and how that balance would be struck. I worried about loss of control. I worried whether, as soon as we had this large amount of user feedback, whether that would be used as stick to beat us by the publisher. And also, I know best, right? I'm a game designer. I've been doing this for 20 years. I'm fucking great. Why would I, the creator of this game, allow the masses to dictate what we were going to do with the game? That was the selfish part of me speaking. And was this an ethical thing to do? Were we just getting free labour? Or were the users that we were going to use to test our game going to appreciate what we were doing and feel like they were part of the process rather than just being exploited? What we needed was a large-ish number of users. We wanted to capture a bunch of different people's opinions, but they needed to be dedicated to this game and broadly self-selecting. We didn't want to kind of go out there and grab people and kind of force them into playing.
Did you have a rough idea of what largish meant?
No.
But,
I don't know what the end number was, so
yeah.
hedging the bets heavily with this slide. We wanted fans of the genre. We needed people who understood what we were trying to achieve, what other people in the genre had achieved in the past, and how the techniques they'd learned playing other games would apply to ours. And they committed to breaking the game. Right? We wanted people who, not in a QA sense of finding bugs and doing that, but finding ways to exploit the systems we created, either for good or for bad, and that we could then take that information on board and we could make the game tailored to the sorts of players that we would get ultimately when we released the game. And we had two goals. Part of this process was, it was a longer development than had originally been budgeted for. We asked the publisher for more money, and the publisher said, we think this game's got potential to be special. We're going to give you some more money, but we really want, on launch, you to have a 95% overwhelmingly positive Steam reviews, which is tough. There was no coercion back. It was like, we won't give this money unless you get this, but like, this is your goal. This is where I think this game could be. And I said, in return, I would be nominated for a BAFTA. Spoiler, both of those things happened. And that's not me being smug. No, it's me being smug. This, when I was practicing this earlier on, this ended up being really long, so I'll try not to take as much time on it. But essentially, it was a sort of 18-month period where we did the majority of this kind of user feedback loop. We announced at a thing called The Mix at GDC in 2020, which was a fun time, because I was meant to be going to. I didn't. So we were announced there, we got a good number of wish lists and eyes on the game. That was a great start. Shortly after, there was the Steam Demo Fest, which is now Steam Next Fest, but because it was early in that process, like every process, because it was early, we were one of a small number of games doing a demo rather than the thousands you get this week. So that really helped. That meant people understood what the game was. Our announcement video featured gameplay, and people were like, thank you for doing that. We understand what this game is. It's our sort of thing. Our calls to action from the demo were primarily wishes the game, but secondly, join our Discord. We made a game-specific Discord where the intent was that we would get this group of people who cared about the game enough to join a Discord for a game that didn't exist yet, and they would be our main sort of target for people who were into the game enough that we could use for testing. So we did a closed alpha which made use of that process. So we got all the people on the Discord. We said, do you want to try the game in its entirety before it's out? Obviously, lots of them said yes. We went on our social media and said, listen, if you want to be part of this thing, join the Discord and then join the beta, or join the alpha, and that's how we captured those initial set of people. We did a bit of filtering to make sure they were like active users, so they weren't there specifically just to get a free game. But other than that, we were fairly open with it. We launched a prologue version, which was a version of the demo that was a little bit more advanced and gave more of an impression of what the finished game would be. So that was another way for bringing people into that feedback loop. And then, obviously, the biggest and the widest group of users that we got was when we launched into early access. So we'd ummed and ahed about doing early access, but the feedback from the demos had been sufficiently good that we thought our goal then for early access was to make it as complete a game as possible for the stage it was at. So we emphasised quality over anything else. So while not all the content existed, it was good enough and experienced that if people bought it, paid for it, played it, put it down again, they would be happy. It didn't need to feel like an early access game, but what it gave was the opportunity for people who really engaged with the game, wanted to play it multiple times. They could get into recording their feedback, giving us their feedback, and we could action that so they would end up with an even better game. So that was when we started the most cyclical process of getting user feedback that we could then action to aim for that 95% overwhelmingly positive Steam score. on version 1 release. So throughout, we were trying to move people essentially along this kind of quality of feedback thing. There's no science to this, but essentially what we were doing initially was looking at undirected feedback. So we would search on social media, we would search on YouTube, we would find people who were playing the demo or what have you, and listen to what they said and try and work out what they meant. And that's fine, but there are better ways of doing that. So there was directed feedback. So people who played the prologue, who played the demo, they would come on the Steam forum for full game and ask questions about it. We would respond to those. Or they would join the Discord, ask those questions, they would send emails to the studio. All of those things were what came into our circle. We tried to incorporate that feedback into our designs. And then there was official feedback. So we had a Discord channel specifically for feedback where we would take information from that, turn it into tasks for us to do. We also sent out surveys to anyone who was on the alpha and beta program who could ask them very specific questions that we needed answering. And then finally there was reported feedback. So as time went on, we went to a couple of systems that would give us a much higher quality of response from players, which I want to talk about briefly. So we implemented this feedback bot during during the early access period. So it was some months into early access. We were finding that people had lots to say about the game, but it was quite hard to just read through all this text and these conversations and find stuff that was specifically actionable. So we created a Discord bot, sat in the Discord, we created special channels for it, for bugs and feedback, and then if people formatted their message in a certain way, it would be automatically added to ClickUp, which is our task management software. And that made a huge difference. And part of the reason why the formatting existed was to help with the code for that bot, but also it self-selected the people who'd read the instructions, so understood what to do, cared enough to actually write that stuff down in a way that they understood. And when people didn't do that, if other people sort of agreed with it, who were kind of good community members, they would reformat it in the way that we needed it, and then it would be added to the system. So it became this virtuous circle of the community helping other members of the community report bugs that they cared about enough. So it became really, those became our kind of higher priority things. We were able to see those very easily. Inevitably, we had to do some manual filtering of that stuff and some management of that stuff, but it was a really good quality process. And all my worries about people abusing the system or messing around, or none of those came to pass, because we had built a community who were respectful of the game, respectful of us and one another, and they just did a great job of kind of building up this process. And we always responded to people, and we always gave them updates on what we were doing. We had a roadmap as we carried on, and people really appreciated knowing that suggestions that they made, bugs that they reported, were all getting fixed or acted on. So to give you an example of that, this is a really sort of fixy bug report, and it will mean nothing to anyone apart from me, but that is a sort of perfect example. It's someone saying, here's a bug, when I do this and this happens. And I know exactly what that meant, and I could fix it in a couple of days. And that would be turned into this task on our ClickUp, and then it just moved into the whole process. So I would be reporting bugs, our internal testers would be reporting bugs, plus we'd get these from the users. And they would all move into the same system, and we could prioritize everything alongside one another. So if people included pictures, that would be added to the task. If people responded to stuff in the Discord, that would be added as comments to the task as well. So if it was a more complicated thing and other people had additional information, then that would all go into this. And that was so useful. Post-launch, we've been doing additional content, and we've been working with the same beta group to test the additional content. We also added an in-game bug reporting system, which sort of does the same job, moves stuff into ClickUp, but it also zips up all their save game data and provides a screenshot of exactly where they were at the time, and for weird bugs where stuff happens that you don't really expect, having the save game and all that stuff is super useful. So we have that system as well now, so we're going to roll that forward into future games, because that's been super useful. And we kept the Discord bot too, partly for sort of legacy reasons for people who like reporting bugs in that way, and partly because sometimes it's nice to have a backup. So this is not to say that the user feedback suddenly becomes the most important thing in your life. It is a tool that you can use like any others to help design your game. Certain players will play your game in ways that they naturally play that no one else in the world will play. And you have to understand that you don't necessarily need to listen to them, you just need to understand that they exist and adapt accordingly. You still have to decide what your game is and who it's for. Users might have an idea of the thing they want, but we also want to reach a wider audience than super hardcore card game players. So there's cards in the game that I know exist that none of the hardcore players play because they're not great in the game, but they look amazing, so loads of people pick them and play them all the time anyway. So we accommodate different playstyles, not just the people who are going to jump on Discord and tell us if a card is useless and rubbish, but different strokes. And typically players don't have all the answers or know what they want, but you can filter the information that they give you to come up with good decisions. Vibes are as actionable as specific bug reports. If lots of people are saying similar things, sometimes the cause will be different to what they stated it is, but you'll get an impression of what's going wrong and you can adjust accordingly. Game design is still difficult. This is not going to fix every game design. What it's going to do is sit on top of what you were planning on doing anyway and allow you to take into account your community and what they want. And as a sort of side note, we did some analytics for the game. We recorded a whole bunch of stuff, and it's quite hard to look through. And I wish we used it more, but you can also gain a lot of data from observing what people are doing as well as hearing what they say. So yeah, sorry, I've gone on a little bit longer than I should have. If you want to hear more about this sort of stuff, there's a free talk on the GDC Vault from the Slay the Spire guys from Mega Crits, who are amazing and who've done so much more of this than I have. But yeah, so they sort of inspired us to some of the stuff that I've talked about today, and it's really worth watching. So yeah, that is me. Thank you very much.